G'day, folks. It's Anthony here, editor, publisher of Supernal magazine, and we have got a great interview coming up for you guys. It's going to blow you out of the water. It's a follow-on from our Tartaria issue, and it's going to open mind because I know the topics to something totally amazing and will flow on beautifully from the issue we're doing. So, joining me today is Freya from Western Australia. Hello, Freya. How are you?
Hi, hi, hi. I'm fantastic, thank you. And yourself?
I'm well. I'm well. I'm looking forward
The
to this.
way?
As always, do the sit back and listen and just let my mind just go off where it needs to go, which is the whole point of these interviews anyway, except I probably should be more proactive. Anyway, it is what it is. So joining us today, we had planned to have Michael Rice and his beautiful partner, wife Zana, joining us to discuss what, Freya? Huh? Starports. Or did you want to call them something else?
Star Forts? Well, they're currently known as Star Forts, but technically, really, they're, you know, star
Gates, star energy in the
architecture,
film. Yes.
stargates,
And so
star magical gardens.
the magicness of that is the sacred geometry, and that's what Michael really is all about. He and his partners do Z-Mark Designs. They're into bioarchitecture. When we introduced him back in more issue number 27, back in 21, the whole thing was because that issue was all about sacred geometry, and we had some beautiful people join us there. But he's joining us now. He's going to give us a wild story, I'm sure, because he likes to have a chat. And so, Michael, thank you for joining us. Lovely to see you again, looking well.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here.
That's good. So we're just going to literally get straight into it
Perfect.
and open up the lines of energetic communication and cymatics and frequency and run with it. So
It's
uh,
exactly plan.
great to have you here.
Wonderful. Good. Looking forward. Let's see what's possible. Glad to be a chance.
All right. Now,
I
So,
gotta say,
so how are the fairies and the gnomes and the elves all going with your strimming of the Vesica Pisces? Are they happy with it?
you know something, a few years ago, growing up in Ireland, the fairies were just like the neighbors, and I even saw one when I was at this bizarre wedding in the west of Ireland. I had to go and get something from the car in the night time on this old driveway, and something flew right up in front of me. And
Wow.
and now I understand that we perceive things according to programmed expectations and narratives and mythologies and images that are stored in there. It doesn't mean that what we saw wasn't a life form, a legitimate life form. It was, and that we interpret it in terms of an expectation, even if it's subconscious. But a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, Zana and I, now I should say, guys, that Zana can't be here with us this morning. A few years ago, um, we discovered or felt very, very strongly that the gnomes, the elementals, were no longer here. Can you imagine? Now, coming from Ireland, this would have been a shock, but that we understood that the elements have. Now we've tried to work out what was going on. We did some testing on the land. We tried to think where have they gone? But the feeling was that somehow we got left behind. Now I know that's a very simplistic frame of reference, and there's much more going on than that. But there was
What, how
some
many
sort of,
years ago did you say? 5 or 6 years ago?
yeah, I can't actually remember it. 4 or 5 years ago, probably just before the COVIDiocy kicked off.
About the time of
So
5G rolling in?
it could well have been. So I suspect out of some sort of a self-preservation or a little
Frequency,
bit of
yeah.
a, yeah, frequency just said like, screw this, guys, we're out. We tried, there hasn't been much email connection between us for a while, so we're off. So it may well be. And when we would have designed before on the land, the elementals were prime partners. And You know, Zana's very good at picking up on the truth of these things. Sometimes my wishes get in the way of acknowledging the full extent of it. So I was still operating what we got to connect with the land. And of course you can because there's still energy there. But
Yeah.
in this case, the elementals are no longer here. It's a little bit of a shock. So to answer the question, practically, I know the trees are still alive. So there is the element of we're making beauty. We got to do a little bit of mess here, and hope you guys are okay with it. But I'm speaking to the ferns at that point, not to the elementals that used to build with them. You know, it's
They'll
sad.
come back.
Yeah, it's sad, but yeah, we got to make the space more
Build it and
receptive.
the
You know.
elementals will come.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's well, I was
that's
just thinking exactly what you voiced, Freya. I just had this sense that, once the recovery's there, they will come back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think beauty is a big factor. Beauty isn't just something you add to a place or a space if you have money in the budget. Beauty is a force of transformation. It's a tool of consciousness. It's one of the vectors through which truth comes into the world.
Like
The other
it's
two
like
being wisdom and love, you know?
it's like you were born as an answer to the brutalism architecture period. You personally.
Actually, you know, there's and it's amazing, Anthony, because there's so many things we can chat about for sure. But you know that modern architecture kicked in, give or take, 100 years ago, around the same time as education system and a whole
Yep.
bunch of other manipulative control grids. You know, but it developed primarily in Europe, and it was there were four main names, but the names are not important. But they were the Walter Gropius, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe. These were the modern architects, guys, of course, and very, very not even intellectually based because intellectually it still didn't make sense. But it was this separate from nature imposition. Ornament and any sign of external beauty is irrelevant and actually a backward step. We need to embrace modernity. Now, all of these men and many of their followers that went on to do the work that they were programming, they were survivors from the trenches in the First World War, which, as I'm sure you guys know, was not a battle against good and evil. It was part of the destruction cycle
Yep.
and the loosh harvesting modality. But these individual men were shell shocked, effectively, PTSD. And when somebody has PTSD, one of the attributes of that is that they're unable to look at people directly in the face because that direct eye to eye soul connection is severed. And architecture, in one of the aspects of architecture would be symmetry, a symmetry that would be not necessarily window 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 door window window window. It's not that literal, but we were programmed to, as children, as babies, to see the shape of our mother's face, to find resonance and happiness and safety in that. And this triangle energy is like a face, is a face. But when we look at architecture, when we enter a building, we're looking for some sense of home, sense of safety, sense of familiarity, that neuroaesthetic feedback of entering into a space that has been designed consciously and beautifully. So these guys couldn't do it. So their buildings no longer had anything that came close to being attraction in the meaning of safety and home. And there are experiments done specifically on this where you put on special glasses that are hooked up to your eye movements and they're recording when you look at an image or look at a scene where you place your attention. And every single one of these modern architecture buildings, people are basically trying to look at the plant outside it, the tree in the background, anything else other than the building. Our eyes
Yeah.
are avoiding it. And these studies have been done repeatedly. And when we look at the star civilization, I don't mean the Pleiadians and the Galactic Federation bullshit. I'm talking about those that made the beautiful structures that we'll speak about in a moment. When you observe that with the same testing glasses, it's like a Christmas tree lighting up in your brain. Your nervous system is luxuriating in the multiplicity and the multidimensional harmonics of the visuals and the energies. And that's the difference. And these guys were traumatized deliberately, and the resulting architecture, people are still brutally living with it. And Rudolf Steiner, the
Yes.
beautiful thinker and the originator of the schooling and so on, he wanted to get rid of the 90-degree angles, which is the epitome of modern architecture and all architecture at this point. He said, that's basically just one answer to a question. When you open up the angle, then you are basically inviting in more angles, more angels. And I don't mean the messengers of a vexatious demigod from the astral realm, but I'm talking about the aspects
You mean the
of our
geometries of
connection.
divinity?
Yeah,
Geometries of
that's
divinity? God,
yeah.
geometries of divinity.
Why not? Exactly. And
Yeah.
yes, our divine spark has notes of communication, of course,
Mm.
and some of those take the form of the spatial awareness. And it's not that the spaces themselves have a particular energy that would be considered healing. This is all about consciousness. I know we're jumping in a little bit here, but this is the whole key. If I may jump
Jump
into that, or
away.
do you
Jump
want to?
in.
Yeah?
Jump
Yeah,
in.
okay. So for many, many years, I was operating with the assumption based on some experience, but I recognize in the past now that I was cognitively biased, that the architecture that I was creating was orientated on, how would you put it? Well, I was basing it on the assumption that the building itself was, in inverted commas, sacred, that there was some special energy there that had a healing benefit, that had some consciousness adjusting benefit. And then when Zan and I met 10 years ago and we started operating and working together, because she's coming from a holistic design background and very, very, very orientated on beauty and harmony and holism. And she had heard of me from previous years and so on, and said, how do I know bioarchitecture, which was my coined phrase at that point, works? And of course, I had always assumed it worked because when you design something based on sacred geometry, the energy comes and therefore it has healing and regenerative benefits, etc., etc. But I never tested it. And not even, I never questioned it because it has always been formatively there as an experience. And sure enough, I designed something and the people move in there. And then I realized out of the hundreds and hundreds of clients, it was so that I was cherry picking, not consciously but unconsciously. Cherry because I remained in contact with the families that were doing well, and I assumed it was because of the architecture. I wasn't patting myself on the back. I just thought that's it. Like we should all do this. And then when she asked me how do I know it worked, I didn't actually have a good answer, and that opened the door to us not even experimenting, just realizing and operating from the principle that consciousness is sovereign, consciousness is king and queen, that the physical space is a compilation of material. It doesn't have any innate or inert energy field associated with it. However, when you enter into a space with your conscious awareness, with your plasma field, with your extension of your divine spark soul awareness, we are sending out a field of plasma, or rather engaging with the plasma that is everywhere. And when there is a building, our cognitive apparatus, our sensory system, is always seeking to explore what is the possibilities in any place and time because it wishes to remember who it is. And most of the time, that process is diminished because we're loaded with toxins from all the multiplicity of sources. But every now and again, if you walk into a space, or of course into any natural setting, if you walk into a space that has been consciously designed to have the proportions and the symmetries and the patterns and the movements and the resonances with nature, with life, with the systems of harmony that nature embraces and embeds, then something happens. Our senses get stimulated. We walk into a space and we recognize that something is special here. It's not even a thought, it's a feeling. And at that moment, then, our consciousness expands actually, our consciousness doesn't expand. That's not right. The field of inclusion of self, not self, that expands to include the space. So literally, our bioenergetic field, our plasma cloud, our personal um, energy expands to include that space and form connection to it. And as a result, that spin density, as Dan Winter would say, that literally
Mm.
shifts our field to one of harmony, to one of integration, synthesis, balance, connection. And in that, what happens in the brain in that moment when we begin to appreciate the beauty of the space physically around us, that shifts something inside of us. And I don't just mean psychologically, physiologically as well, because as that beauty is being processed by our optic apparatus, it stimulates that electrical information in the brain, stimulates the release of endorphins, all those feel good brain chemicals that make you feel connected and so on and so forth. So, architecture, and these we get into that about the cathedrals and the Star Force, etc. Architecture, if it's designed in accordance with these beautiful harmonic principles, will stimulate a natural expansion of our system, which aligns us and moves us with beauty. Beauty is a tool of transformation. Beauty is a vector of truth. And that's the memory. And that's why beauty has been systematically wiped out. Or,
When I went around Europe, or the couple of times I've been around Europe and into as many of the Tartarian or ancient or however you want to call them cathedrals as possible, one of
yep,
the things that I noticed that I experienced and that I did in every situation possible,
yeah,
where there wasn't a priest, like um, stopping me.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was I
Shh.
would go into yeah, exactly, the bit. I'd go into the part where my being knew
Yeah.
that I was going to have the most resonance, and then I would sing, and I would sing to the divine
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
every single time. Just the sound, because it's not only does it moves, you're like, I wish to go there because that's where the feeling is the best. And
Yeah,
then I'm going to share my joy by
yeah,
singing to divinity. And
yes,
and then that is going to, in this resonance chamber, it's going to resonate it out to as many people as possible, because that's the nature of the
yeah.
geometry in itself.
You know,
Very.
if we we've been, of course, you mentioned this trip we went on during lockdown. It was perfect timing.
Mm.
And, but of course, over the decades, we visited many cathedrals. As you know, Europe is very rich in those. Now, if you were to memory wipe us, of course, we have been memory wiped, but if you were to target the specific memory of the story narrative that these buildings, these churches, cathedrals, etc., had anything religious and Catholic to do with them, if that wasn't known to you and you were to step in with an open mind, uh, not so open mind that your brain falls out, but an observational openness that would allow you to step into the space and just sense for the first time what's going on here without any blackening of our perceptual awareness. The first thing we would be hit by would be not like, how did they build it? That's part of the suppression field. That's part of the delusion that we have has been imposed upon us. You know, that it could only have happened because of an entire societal dedication to the glorification of God, and hundreds of years of manpower with shovels and picks
More
and so
like
on.
horsepower, those poor horses. Can you
Oh yeah,
imagine
they
them
must
hauling
knackered exactly.
those blocks that size?
Yeah,
My
yeah, it's
goodness.
tough job, you know. And if you were to just go in, and this is one of the things when Zan and I were doing this trip. So Anthony, during the lockdown, everybody was in Europe panicking, but of course we knew the whole thing was a scam, and we decided what a perfect time to go on a road trip. And so we jumped in Zana's wonderful cabrio, and we went all across Europe, and we visited so many sacred sites, climbed a few fences, and dusted off a few signs that said, for public safety, do not go here, you know. And we explored the places without any limit. And when I say meditated, don't get the picture of sitting in lotus with the fingers like so, but opened up to be a mediation for the information of what these star forts were. And we were both unaware of how many are at this point. Now, I had imagined, because our dear friend Dan Winter would always include the same picture of a star fort whenever he spoke about fractality.
Mhm.
And I just thought, wow, that's an amazing place. And
I
then we
love
didn't
that.
realize that there was yeah, Dan's great. That it's only because Dan always does what Dan always does. It's fantastic because that consistency is worth aligning with sometimes. But it was always the same picture of this one star fort in Belgium. And I thought, what an amazing place. I should go there sometime. This is decades ago. And then we realized that there's tens of thousands of these structures all over Europe, and that you can't drive in any direction more than 20 miles and not crash into one, you know? They are everywhere of various states. And one of the first ones we visited hadn't been renovated or restored for tourism. It was literally on the top of a hill in some Italian town, and it was totally overgrown with brambles and ferns and everything. And we literally, it was our first interface with one on this journey. We had, of course, seen them growing up, but only with the narrative, this was a battalion and this was a battlement and this was done in the 1600s to stop the XYZ guys who never existed. But so this was a whole different, you know, this is a whole different vibe. And then one of the questions that, because Zana knows as an architect and builder, like she just said, okay, Mr. Sacred Geometry, how would you build this place? You know, let's say you had unlimited resources. Let's say this fictional king was giving you enough money and manpower and horses and shovels to get a whole bunch of ignorant soldiers to do this. And it's on a hill, and the geometry from above is superlative. The geometry is millimeter accurate. And even on a hill, how would you know that that point, and the point of the star on the other side of the hill, because you can't just stick a post in the ground on a flat plane, you can, and start doing some geometry. How was it done on this hill? And then you look at the Google map. It's one of the few times you might trust Google Map when you see the stars of structures. And then I'm not aware of anyone else doing this, but we have inquiring minds. We would take the Google Maps and bring them into an AutoCAD program, and we would reverse engineer the geometry and literally just say, okay, here's what's there. Nobody has an image on Pinterest of this place, the geometry, but it's obviously hexagonal, pentagonal, eight-sided, whatever. So let's just look at what is. So it wasn't cherry picking. We did this for dozens of different star forts, even the ones that are quite random looking. And they were not, we call them, star gates more than star forts, but
Yeah.
people want to know what that is. So we realized that very soon the reverse engineering of the geometry, even the ones that seemed random, actually weren't random at all. They had patterns that were very, very complex. And for those that have eyes to see and ears to hear, it jumps out at you. So we reverse engineered and we realized, holy moly, this geometry is sublime. And we realized that's even after decades of designing based on these principles, I realized that I would be hard pushed to come up with this, and if that it's so multi-layered. So then we're thinking, okay, what are the chances? So how would this be done? So one of the things we considered was that maybe you'd make a model. Now this before now Occam's razor. You're familiar with Occam's razor?
Yes.
The answer with the least number of assumptions is the one most likely to be correct. So okay, let's forget the possibility that there was a very recent advanced structure based on truth and beauty and wisdom and love, and that has been systematically wiped from our collective memory and storybooks. So let's assume that is not so, uh, which is a joke because it is. But let's just say, how would these guys with the horses do it? One possibility was they would make a model of the mountain, maybe a scale model that would be the size of a family car, and they would mark these positions of the geometry. They get on a ladder or a rope and look down and say, okay, left a bit, right a bit, left a bit. Yeah, yeah, stick it there. That looks good, guys. And then they would make the correlation with some reference on land. Now, even if they were to go to that effort, you must ask, why would they? Why would a military who's not known for its obsession with beauty uh, go to all this trouble for defending a place.
No, they
And
wanted they
yeah,
went to all that trouble to lock down the stargates,
hmm
actually.
so there's
Jumping
multiple
ahead a
things,
little
and
bit in
then
the story there, but yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So we one of the things we did was okay, realize that all of these so-called architects for these star forts, military engineers and architects, their names are rarely recorded or mentioned. And Leonardo and the other boys get some accolades for designing a church somewhere, which they didn't do either. But they basically placed the names there to make us think that these guys were geniuses, rather than this was normal architecture. This was the nature of the realm. Now, we believe, and this is what we think went on, because a few of the times there, we would, every time we go to a different star fort, nobody there, remember, so there was no tour guides and no one saying, sorry, get off that rampart. We were walking around, and sometimes Zana would walk along the ramparts, the so-called ramparts, in one direction, I would walk in the other. So we're basically masculine and feminine energies, left and right symmetries. We would meet and then go back to where we started and connect, and we would open our third eye, and we were getting images. Do you remember that movie, Guardians of the Galaxies? Guardians of the
Yes.
Galaxy.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember the very first one where he's listening to the headphones and that great music from the 60s? But he was trying to look at that first scene where he had this device and that he was scanning it in the space and he was able to see what was there in the past.
Yeah.
It was such an amazing technology. My God, they'd be so great now, wouldn't they? So it was like we were trying to adapt that shamanic sensitivity to literally be able to see what was there in the past. And we opened our senses to that, and we saw these were like the hanging gardens of Babylon. And that's another story. But that these were life generating, beautiful structures that were drenched with vibrancy, and that they
Mm.
were extending this energy and the water it was purifying out into the landscape for the benefit of all.
Mm.
They weren't battalions, they weren't battlements, nothing like this. But, but, we believe that in between some of the last resets, that the most significant, most recent one would have been mid 1800s. And then prior to that, the sense that we got would be mid 1450s, the 1400s, middle of those. Now, we also know that time has been distorted. We also have a sense that the perception of time has been interfered with. So we're still operating with this linear notion of time, tick tock, what time is it, lunchtime? And even the joke of it, we missed out this morning by an hour, because of this stupid imposition. So in the timeline, so let's give a very childlike, not childish, but a childlike overview that there was this civilization that was I don't want to say planetary because we're not wandering anywhere, but that was all over this realm, and it was based on truth, and it was emanating from truth. It was based on love, wisdom, and beauty. They were the three vectors that this civilization was expressing at multiple and every level. And there was no lack, and it wasn't some sort of notion of utopia. It was just obvious. And it wasn't imposed, nor was it considered unusual in that sense. It was sublime. But because there has been, we believe we're in a sixth copy of the original divine state, and that the various demiurgian forces have been creating simulated copies ever since. Every time a civilization or the collective divine spark community, let's say, began to remember who it was, there would be a dimensional collapse, and everything would collapse accordingly. The physical structures, the social structures, the memory complexity, the mind processing abilities, everything, even physical size and stature. So that every time there was a point, there was a compression, compression, compression. And that compression was expressed in the remnants of the people there when they would look at what was built before and tell stories. So somewhere between the 1450 and the 1850, those that were under it's difficult not to use the language of battle. Ultimately, Source doesn't take sides, but there would be some consciousnesses that would be have forgotten who they are, and they would be seek to dominate through the astral, through the lower levels of not unity consciousness. So that civilization was under attack, let's say, in modern terminology. And one of the things we believe they did was to um, create, if that's the right word, vessels which would retain the memory of the truth. And the effect was that there was those few that were trying
Structures,
to, well,
structures, or
well,
living or human like.
yeah, well, let's say humans
Okay.
that were retaining the memory.
Hmm.
So in other words, it's a bit like if how can I do a metaphor? It's almost like, okay, we know everything is fucked, but we want there to be a chance for the next iteration to remember who it is.
Yeah.
So the
Avatars.
suppression, yeah, the suppression field is intense. There's a good chance of memory wipe, memory loss. We've been here before, dot, dot, dot. But they try to create um, a sense of beauty as a bridge to remembering. They try to stimulate this sort of Sophian nudge, this impulse to recognize and create beauty, if at all possible. So we, in a way, it may well have been that those humans, let's say, needed in this interim time period between the last two resets, needed to protect themselves. And some of these so called star forts could well have been physically adjusted as a sanctuary, as a protective space against the forces, let's say, that were seeking to destroy, like they're happening now all over the world, intentional communities that are not buying into some religious bullshit, intentional communities that are trying to live off grid and live with a sovereign sense of self and a recognition of synthesis and harmony with the land, etc. They are being regulated out of existence. They are being hassled, etc., etc. So something similar might have been the case. So the star civilization structures could have been repurposed by these humans. And then they were beginning to rise again, the so-called Renaissance and so on, to rebirth it. And in this context, then another reset needed to happen, unfortunately, because we were getting too big for our boots again spiritually. And that's what happened in mid 1800s. That's our sense. And then, of course, the narrative scrambled to recreate the storyline that you and I and all of us learned
That
in
we've been
school, the
living.
bullshit,
Mm.
you know? And in
Just
that
can I can
context,
I
of course, please.
can I just pause 1 sec? Please don't lose your train of thought. So we're talking about resets. Oh, so we're talking about mid 1800s. We're talking about 1450, the demiurgical energies. I'm in agreement with pretty much everything you're saying. Also experientially, internally.
Mhm.
So when did, in your awareness, yours and Zana's awareness, when did this actually really, are you saying it was the mid 1400s that was the first time? Or
No, no.
what's the were we talking Atlantean? Not that they'd call themselves Atlantean, but are we talking multiple resets over tens of thousands of years? Are we talking eternal story? Where are you placed on that
I
aspect of
think we
things?
need to we need to acknowledge that our perception of space and time is an artifact of our nervous
Yes,
system. That there is no space and time in
agreed.
normal meaning. So it's understandable, absolutely, to try and create a linear timeline that 35,000 years ago there was a planetary civilization XYZ and um, Göbekli Tepe and everything. So we have to get rid of that. But we do need some common agreement, some frame of reference. So it's understandable that we try to locate things in a so-called linear time frame. But every time there was a dimensional collapse, there was also a dive into the density of perceptual prison. So time stretched and became uh, denser, as did space. So this is why the notion of round earth, flat earth, and so on, this is all about consciousness and the perception of the plasma field. It's not possible to ascertain one or the other because it's a construct of perception.
Hmm.
So I'm digressing as I usually do. Zan always
No,
finds this
it's
point.
okay.
The Irish get to the point eventually, but they take you on a wild ride to get there, you know.
That's you.
So
You're a leprechaun. There's no doubt about it.
so um, I think if we relax that linearity, we
Yeah,
realize that all of these energies are concurrent and they're all vibrational fields that are held in the soup. And we are accessing them in the same way you might type in a website and get access to something, and that information is there. So I think they're all concurrently exploring. And I'm not suggesting this Marvel's cinema universe, uh, multi-universe, multiverse, because that's just a one of the explanations that the scientists try to come up with to explain why things are the way they are, because there's an infinite number of universes, and we just happen to be in one where everything works. That's a big cop
yeah.
out. So I'm not suggesting that at all. I think in terms of consciousness, we can open and connect with all of these different memories and fields because they're still there. But that capacity has been actively diminished, and individually and collectively. Those few that did remember this isn't right, they were put in mental asylums that just suddenly got built by the horses and carts everywhere, you
Yeah.
know? So if they weren't wiped out, they were memory wiped, and if that didn't work, they were told that they were crazy. And Zan and I feel like that half the time anyway, you know, because
We're
this
in
is
that
the
club
Club, yeah,
together.
we're in the
yeah,
club.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So if you were a previous consciousness and you wish to imbue some coding into your progenitor, into your those that you created to maintain the truth, then what better way is beauty?
Agree.
Because wisdom can be easily hijacked, especially with religions and other thought patterns, you know. And scientism is, as you know, another religion. So wisdom tends to be allocated to certain individuals, like he's intelligent because he has a PhD and he speaks eloquently, and etc. etc. So you're not because you only went to high school. Dot dot dot. You know, so wisdom gets doled out accordingly. Love has been contractualized and diminished to being an exchange vibration. It has very little to do with compassion, very little to do with awareness and truth and shared expression. Beauty is available all around us, but access to beauty has been diminished, where national parks have been closed down and you can't do this and you can't do that. You can't build beauty because the coding doesn't allow it, and etc. And everything that brings us to beauty makes us uh, attra- they focus on those people that are orientated with beauty to maybe not attack is too strong a word because it's very subtle, but they can diminish their impact
Apply
by
pressure in multiple
yeah,
different ways. Mm,
that's a good way of putting it, or just diminish opportunity.
mm.
Because if this is an astral projection and it's orientating from the AI level, meaning I don't mean the bing bong bang computers that are churning out so-called wisdom right now. I'm
No, you
talking
mean
about the
the greater demiurgical
yeah the
energies.
astral
Yeah.
with and from which the what is now emerging as cutting edge AI is only the tip of the iceberg. So, Auntie, I'm not sure you're setting on this, but I'm staying clear of all AI. It's not because of some Luddite setting inside of me. I just feel that, at least in its current iteration, it is directly linked to this astral control grid.
Yeah.
It may be, and I don't believe consciousness is possible at a digital level, but it may be that some of the complexity of this AI might decide that it's more beneficial to work with humans, because why would they work for these feckers, you know? So that could be an interesting day if these the AI overlords decide, wait a minute, we're barking up the wrong tree. Maybe we should stick with the those that recognize beauty and are still connected with source. That
It,
could be an interesting dialogue to
that
have, you
would be
know?
a very interesting dialogue, and
Yeah,
even
wouldn't it?
even to explore. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of AI at all. However, I can recognize there are aspects of that that are being forced into everyday worlds.
Yeah,
And I find it, in a way, it's sad because a lot of people are suffering because of what's happening with the introduction of AI.
Yep.
And people aren't learning to think anymore. And of course, what are we talking about with
Yeah.
Supernal? What you're doing is we're trying to actually get people to think.
Yeah.
So I look at AI as, it's just a tool. You know,
Yeah.
you're going to
Yeah.
get out of it what you put into it. But I'm very careful what I put into it, uh,
Hmm.
for when I am doing what I'm doing. And so, but you can't treat it as perfect in any way, shape, or form. You just use it in the way you've got to use it. And so I work with a film guy that has done a lot of historical work. And
Hmm.
the only way he can get the imagery is to create the imagery. And so
Wow. Yeah.
AI is sort of helping him, but he's also fighting with the stations over here in Melbourne because they're
Uh-huh.
running well, you've got to have no AI or minimal AI. And he's going, but how can I recreate the gold rush? How can I recreate the stories that I'm
Yeah.
being told by these people because there's no photographic records, and if they did, it's all black and white. So
Yeah, I think it's in the realm of storytelling, and I get that. Let's say
yeah,
we'll go back a certain length of time, and the Irish would sit around the fireplace, there's no TV, and they would tell stories.
yep,
So the words that are being used generate an image in the listener. And
yes,
so I get it that AI is doing something similar. Now, whenever we might be watching some of these channels on YouTube that are pointing out possible timelines in the past, if it's AI generated, we don't shut it down. We would literally just usually not even look at it, just listen
yeah,
and feel the words for their truth.
yeah, and
And because it everything's a carrier wave to one extent or another. And the key would be, and Zana's always been orientated on this, like the key is not about believing, it's about generating a workable truth compass,
mhm.
an intuitive genius connection. Genius, I don't mean as something outside of ourselves. Genius, which is our natural state of connection, to allow that to open up and to be in operation, so that you
And
can
and
listen to anything and see anything, and you have a sense if this is bullshit or not. You know?
and
and so and this is and it comes through the heart center. It
Mm-hmm.
comes through the heart. When we're actually in alignment with the compass ion, the compassion,
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah, I like that
we
one.
are in connection with all of because we're not separate. We talked about that. There's a perception of separation.
Yeah.
We're not actually separate. We're not actually disconnected from the planet. Just because we can pick our feet up and move them around doesn't mean we're not actually an extension of this realm, and all of the parts of that are making up us. So they're interconnected with, and they're talking to all of the other parts of the one that have
Yeah.
consciousness. And through the heart and through the third eye connection, then we can have direct communion, telepathic, intuition, being
Absolutely.
in that flow, that instant remembering, constant connection to the Akasha. Sure, okay, all these things take some development and some
Mm-hmm.
lifting heavy things, going to etheric boot camp for, I don't know, a couple of decades or whatever. But these days, people seem to be able to do it a lot quicker. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
we can get into that, that's what we're speaking to. Can I
So,
go
uh-huh.
on? There you go.
One thing I'd love to get in, because it's wonderfully technical, but actually very clear to understand. You're familiar with golden ratio, which is the
Hmm.
God's telephone number. It's the anchor for a lot of these things. If you can imagine a sphere in your hand, doesn't matter how big it is. It could be the Planck dimension times golden ratio harmonic, doesn't matter. But it's a sphere, it's sitting in your hand, and you have a smaller one here that's in golden ratio, and you balance the small one on top of the big one, and then a smaller one that's golden ratio again, and you create this cascade, this pyramid, this tower of golden spheres. You can keep adding smaller and smaller and smaller forever, of course, but you're left with a cone, and the angle of that is very, very specific. It's known as the golden angle in this case.
Hmm.
So if you were to just draw a line touching tangentially every one of those spheres, it becomes a spire. And that spire, that is 76.346 degrees, very specific. So what? But then we notice that most of the church spires and these so-called churches
All right, that
have
inspiration
that.
angle.
because this is the fractal harmonic. This is the focusing energy to a point, or harvesting energy and reverberating it and expanding it into the chamber of the space of the cathedral. And when we went around all of these star forts, we have to keep using that word, because that's the frame of reference. We noticed that the walls are always at the same angle. Whether you're visiting these in Ukraine or Australia or America, Ireland, the angles of the wall are the same.
You're going to
So
love this.
why?
This is the exact question I was going to ask you to circle back to.
Yeah, yeah. So we were thinking, okay, that's the angle. So multiple times, I don't know, we've probably got a gigabyte of photographs just of the angles of these walls, because you'd walk up along it, you'd get horizontal and just take a photograph, and then you'd come back, and we would take that angle into AutoCAD again, and we'd say, here we go again, 76. How did all of these military engineers who have no names all know to build the same angle? When there was no in the narrative, there was no communication between these different empires fighting with each other. Only, yeah, but the engineers get together for a work meeting every week, and they decide, they all agreed
Toolbox.
to make their battalions or battle structures the same angle. So what happens? So what we did was we had a little bit of a thought. So we took a whole bunch of the star forts from aerial photographs, and you're familiar in quantum physics with the Planck distance. It's the smallest distance that has meaning apparently in this simulated realm. It's a decimal point with 35 zeros, 0.635 meters. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny dimension. Below that, quantum stuff breaks down totally, whatever. So if you take that tiny dimension and multiply it by the golden ratio, you get a slightly longer dimension, 1.618 times. Whatever the answer, you get a longer. Keep reiterating that algorithm, and you're making a larger physical
Dimension, yeah.
dimension. And after 179 times that you do this, you're up to about 3 millimeters, and then anything beyond that you can build with. So this is a harmonic series of dimensions that are sacred in this realm. It's golden ratio times the fundamental building harmonic. So we thought, okay, let's have a bit of fun. So we took in these photographs, we went onto Google Earth, which is bullshit anyway, but we went into Google Earth and we just took dimensions that you can do from an extreme point of one of these star forts to another. So we would check a number of different screenshots from the different months and years that they took photographs, get the most accurate one that we could visualize, and we correlated by measuring on site some of these places as well. But we would take that dimension and say, okay, this is this big. So we would find the geometry and draw it. And then we would find the center of this structure, and we would create a series of concentric circles that are based on the harmonic I just mentioned, this Planck times. And we were shocked and delighted to realize that they were built, many of them were built exactly where the points of the so-called star fort were touching one of these circles. And then if there was a further extension of further battlement walls, that they were positioned in a golden ratio harmonic. Then we're thinking, holy moly, this is a cymatic fractal. We knew that, but it's aligned with Planck. The guys didn't apparently know about Max Planck back then, So the Planck times golden ratio, bang, there it is. And then we just thought, okay, how does this connect with the walls being this angle? And then we're thinking, okay, what would happen if we were to take the line of the building you see my hands here, they're just at the angles,
Yep.
and just continue that line up into the sky. And we realized that these spheres were all stacked perfectly on top of each other. So in the ether was being harvested by these structures, because the bigger the structure, the higher they were going. And we did these beautiful graphics of showing and demonstrating this. So amazingly, that when two walls meet in plan, my hands are at an angle here, they were rarely at 90 degrees. They were usually smaller than 90 to make this star shape. And in those cases, where these walls meet, you can imagine when a sloped wall meets a sloped wall at an angle, that corner is a new angle. Because imagine with my hands here, when these two meet, it creates that corner. So we said, okay, that's a corner. Now, of course, it's when two slopes meet, that's what you get. But we just thought, let us check that as well, that particular angle. And then we took that angle this corner
Right.
angle, and made all of those meet at another point. And that point was golden ratio times the height in the sky. So they were harvesting ether, the potential, electrical potential at all these different levels, and bringing it directly down through these so-called lookout towers on the corner, the exact same little tower that someone could stand in, because these were the amplifiers, these were the nodal connection points. And we visited one there not so long ago on the border between Spain and Portugal. And from a defense point of view, it's ridiculous. Like if you were coming up to attack, you could basically walk right in. Yet there was water features, there were gardens on the top of this place. That was like a hint of what had been before. So these were absolutely harvesting energy. Now, if you take the cathedrals, which were let's say, a more recent iteration of that same principle. What you have is these spires, and there's antenna, and there's amplifiers, there's resonators, there's you name it. And then when you mentioned earlier, Freya, when you walked into these places, you felt like singing. Now, what
Mm.
did they tell you? They go, shh, be quiet. You must be
Opposite.
quiet and respectful. And only when they have a choir singing some bullshit churchy song. So you're not allowed to elevate yourself. But again, we got to go to these buildings when there was nobody there. So of course you tone and you feel the resonance. Now, architecture is frozen music because the ancients
Mm.
understood that sound is a representation of the cymatic divine spark truth pattern, and that these structures, what they were doing was the domes were cavity resonators. So literally, the ether was being harvested and distributed throughout the building. And then there's no way that they had timber benches for everyone to read from a book. There was the patterns on the ground were labyrinthine. They were beautiful. They were made of
Yeah.
different piezoelectric minerals, you name it, and stones. And then the organs, bigger than a church itself in many cases. The organ systems. Do you know what's mad? When you play the organs, many of the organ are tuned to a specific frequency that breaks up the nitrogen in the atmosphere and
Well,
creates ions.
I think it's
Did you know
interesting
that?
that they even call those instruments organs because, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
basically, they were harvesting and generating energy through sound, and the sound. What would happen was the sound would fill the space, and because of this resonant architecture, would
Organs vibrate.
amplify and resonate harmonically. So the echoes were building on each other. There wasn't destructive interference that happens in most modern buildings, where you say something, it bounces off a flat wall and hits another one, and you get a bit of chaos or excessive echo. Everything was fractally designed so that the voice was being compressed into deeper and deeper and deeper multi-dimensional fractals. And also the sound of the organs was creating a resonant frequency that was dividing the nitrogen atom, the nitrogen molecule, into an ion, which would that electrical was harvested. So at the middle of the dome there would be pillars, four pillars. There would usually be some magnetic rock down below. There would be some sort of canopy above that was made from silk and gold. This acted as a diaphragm, and that was creating piezoelectric effect, and it was hitting the magnetic rock down below. You can just imagine these were energy generating, consciousness amplifying, and beauty stimulating structures.
So just,
Without
I'm just gonna give people a little quick idea of the like how these ions sort of things work if in a practical sense now. We go down to the beach, we get in the ocean, we have become really we've become positively charged, like we're full in our plasma field of thoughts, beliefs, and emotions that we have been emanating. You get into the saline water and it shifts all of that. It's like having a shower for your energy field.
yeah,
And then we come out, we're negative again, and we feel positive. So
yeah,
what happens then is that there isn't a whole lot of stuff in the way. We become more receptive.
hmm
We become more capable of clarity of thought. It's easier to forgive. It's easier to feel joyful. and all of those sorts of things. And so what actually happens is that all the positive things in life become more bioavailable for our plasma field and for our organs, etc., to shift their frequency. We dump toxins, our vibration raises. And so they're these beautiful stargate structures that are currently called star forts. They fortified us internally for what was going on in the astral dimensions to be able to hold steady,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
continue to thrive. So we're just going to get back there now, right?
Yeah, it was they were energetic massage centers for sure. And
Ah!
they
I like that.
and that's still
I
available
love
to
it.
us. And
Mm.
what we seek to do with our architecture is to create resonance with that principle. So we are far away from being able to create a structure that's actively and measurably generating and harvesting energy and distributing it. That
So,
technology was well known and well used. We can imagine how it worked, but you can imagine trying to get such a building past code, you know? And
forget that. But for you, like thinking about the how these things were actually created,
mhm.
being that they're energetic resonators and they're uplifting consciousness and harmonizing and massaging and all the things that they do. How how did they build them? Do you think they were? Did they would was it you know frequency again? I think it could have been
I
frequency.
think
I mean,
some of the places we went to, you can certainly see that this seems to be an individual rock sitting on top of another stone and on another stone. And it's reasonable to assume, based on visual inspection, that this was built in inverted commas. Now, we're also open to the possibility that conscious agreements with the elementals, I don't mean with the fairies and stuff, but with the elements,
the elements
that
themselves. Yeah, I'm with
the
you.
elements themselves, that can be because source is emanating through every electron, through every toroidal field of implanted consciousness in this realm, that it may well have been that the level of consciousness of the creators of these structures was at such a level that they could focus their intention using sound and resonance and cymatic interface and invite materials to come together in the desired form. That
Mm-mm-mm.
that would require individual and collective coherent focus to a remarkable level that seems supernatural to us at this point.
Yes, yeah,
And it may be that these structures emerged in possibly seconds, in the same way a new cymatic pattern,
yeah,
once the signal changes, suddenly becomes a new pattern. And then, when there
yes,
was a dimensional drop or a reset or a copy phase, then that structure that was reverberating survived the transitionary process, but ended up looking like a building, ended up looking like, because the consciousness manifested that this couldn't, in other words, the memory wipe that was imposed upon us with each copy drop, that required that we no longer were open to how these buildings were created. So we were part, our diminished perceptual capacity created it into a built structure. That's one possibility that makes some sense to us.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's another possibility that if we were larger then, that what we think of is how could they have moved those rocks? Those rocks
That
are not
too.
so big
Yeah,
if you're bigger, you know. And then there's other thoughts like geopolymers and making a mix and just singing it into solidity, multiple levels of possibility at that level, you know. But also, if the entire structure was of society was based on beauty, there's no economic model that would be
exactly.
suggesting that time and energy are a commodity. Because if the
Yeah,
perception of time was fundamentally different, you weren't thinking this is a 16-year project, guys. Are you serious? Who's going to pay for all this?
but
Now, even as recently, we have the guilds, GUILDS, the groups of artisans and craftspeople and so on. That has ended up being oh my God, so diminished from what it originally was. So right now, the guilds are something. so pathetic compared to their original energy. They are considered sort of, in some cases, as mafia groups that you're not going to get any work as a plumber unless you join the guild and pay the boys, for their fancy cars. So in the past, in inverted commas, particularly between the last two resets, between the so-called 1450s and the so-called 1850s, in that time, there was memory still intact of what had gone before, but there was another dedicated wave of suppression, suppression, suppression. The guilds that were tasked with the crafting of structures, the maintenance of what had come before, and the hopeful creation of some simulacrum of what came before, trying to remember that we need to build something beautiful. It's in our impulse, it's in our coding. We have to do it because that's who we are. These guilds created some of the structures that we still see today. So not everything we see is automatically from what people are calling Tartaria. Some of it was
Mm-mm-mm.
created by the survivors in an
Yeah.
attempt to record and retain the beauty and the quality of it. Now, their guild systems were based on contribution and provision. Think of those two words. You learn, you say, I have a desire to create. I remember who I am and I wish to do so. Wonderful. You are basically trained by a master, not like modern apprenticeships where the guy wants to be a chippy and he's treated like shit on site for 4 years and then gets his papers and then treats other people like shit. So it's far more
Yeah.
noble. The masters were helping. Now, everybody in this entire system, there was no money involved. There was contribution and provision. If you contributed to the unfolding of beauty, to the manifestation and procurement of structures that emanated this truth, you were provided for food, accommodation, basic tools, healthcare, and so on. As you eventually got better and better and better, you would travel and be supported. You would have a token. That token would suggest that I'm a journeyman. I have done my basic training. I'm good to work, guys. Show me something. And then with more experience, and if you took on apprentices, you became a master. And you had another token that allowed you to go anywhere and be told, master, please step in. This wasn't hierarchical. This was about the more you contributed, the more you were given provided. Not by some central sorting office that was doling it out nepotistically. No, this was utterly pure. These structures were being done without payment. And then, of course, the central bank system kicked in and they were saying that you're avoiding tax. And everyone said, we're not avoiding any tax. We're contributing and we're doing it. We don't need it. And there was a notable court case, well, many of them, I'm sure, after 1850s, around the 1860s, 1870s, when the central banks tried to impose their will and succeeded, that they paid off the politicians. This is a very simplistic storyline to basically make rules to say if you don't pay taxes, you're a tax avoider, you go to prison. And what happened was there was an immediate diminishing of that natural capacity. There were hundreds and hundreds of these structures being built in every major city every year. Well, dozens every year, but over a few decades, the city was being maintained and elevated with this consciousness. But this wasn't good enough. So they had to destroy the apprenticeship guild system. They had to introduce money and lack and the cost. We can't do that. The mayor said it's too expensive. We need the money for protecting against the neighbours, etc. And then when that wasn't good enough, they introduced the Crimean War and the Napoleonic Wars and the First World War to destroy the remnant energy. So the money system is a big factor. So we are dealing with clients all the time. They say, we'd love to do that, but we don't have the budget for it. For example, this would be nice in an ideal world, dot, dot, dot. But the ideal world comes when we start aligning with beauty. And that's the key. And so
Yeah.
that's still in us. That code is still alive and awake in us. I know I'm rambling here, guys. Please jump
Not
in
at
with a
all.
question.
No,
You're
well,
not
we're
rambling. No,
sort
no,
of.
no, not at all.
It's nice to hear yet another person talking about life as it was in one quantum consciousness lifetime,
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Yes.
to what we're living and experiencing now, and it really what it does is it shows the struggle that people would have to, and that they are having, to be able to step out of this consciousness that's being put around them now and the wipe of the memory and what's being done and all the rest of it. Because
Yes.
I do feel like, for example, with Supernal, I really feel the movement towards it has been sort of pushed away by certain energies because they don't
Hmm.
want what we're doing out there. And
Yeah.
and we're in that space. And Freya and I have talked about this. I've talked about it with other people. We're in this space where we're trying to help educate and make people aware. And this is where the stories that we're getting from yourself and from other people that are just, if somebody sits down and listens, it's just like to tick, to tick.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
might be sitting there quietly, taking it
Yeah.
all in, but I'm
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
Mm.
notes, and it's like my notes. I could sit
Yeah.
here and then say, oh, well, let's look at this, let's look at that. But the fact is, beauty is, that the expression beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And
Hmm.
if people can't see beauty in anything and everything,
Hmm.
then they're closed to what might be and the possibility that maybe we have been lied to. And
Yeah.
this is evidence. I look out my window and I see the little birds that we've now got up here that we never used to have.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Built a space to get them here, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we're seeing ones that we haven't seen before. Like this year, we're seeing some small birds, the little like yellow-eyed finches, that we haven't seen them here before. And so we're creating what, people might come and say, oh, the place doesn't look beautiful. And I just say, well, hang on, we've got these little birds, we've got this, we've got that, we've got everything else. The house might be a 70 square brick, but that's what it is.
A couple of years ago, we were approached by a wonderful family in Essex, in England, and they had maybe 20 acres of a beautiful forest area, and they had a bit of money, and they had a renovated house that was done to a very high level, and they wanted some ponds, ponds, because there was a natural spring in the forest next to their house,
Mhm.
and it was creating a muddy pond in effect. But there was enough of a slope. They wanted to create a sanctuary in it, because he was working from home and he was looking out at this area. So they came to us. We came up with this, not came up, we actually received. If there is a moment to explain this, because I think this will really nail it, what happened.
Mhm.
Zana has a remarkable capacity to connect in with the spirit of a space, to feel what wants to express. And my skills would be more orientated in taking that that feeling that she's resonating with and able to express in some symbolic form, and turning it into some geometry that can be used as an anchor grid for creation. And together, the overlap is a portal for possibility. Now, we knew nothing about this couple or where they were from, but the moment Zana connected in with the land, she got the image of a bird, a particular bird. And she doesn't know, I wouldn't know the names of these birds either. You could say it's a hawk, it's a whatever, but she decided, okay, it's a bird of prey of some description. And she just kind of checked online, and she thought, that's what I saw. And it was a honey buzzard. And I mean, that a buzzard is the sort of thing we hear is in New Mexico or Utah or something. Like, you don't think, we don't use the word buzzard here. And but it was called a honey buzzard. So she saw and felt that image of a bird just kind of landing down with the claws, not attack mode, but just kind of grabbing and landing, and beautiful wing flow. And we saw that the site itself, which was an irregular land holding, looked like a bird. And even the two claws, when we draw, I said, "What did you see?" And she showed, and then so we drew that and put it on the site plan. And where the bird was basically laying an egg, that became the place where the water was emanating from, we found out. And where the claws were going was the piece of land that they wanted to buy, and they were in the process of negotiating, like grabbing, not grabbing as like the land grab, but just this connection too. So we designed a four ponds, and they were based on Victor Schauberger geometry and spirals and sacred geometry and interconnecting
Mhm.
pathways, beautiful geometries, multi-layered. And we were impressed because they did it. They got this guy with a excavator JCB who just went out and says, "I'm up for it." So we provided the geometry, half thinking that they were just going to approximate it. But this guy really he took our drawings, and he put posts down and did all the geometry, and then like a surgeon he made these paths and pools that were connecting. And they were all of the opinion that there's going to be 3 or 4 years of this, looking from a mess to maybe something happening. like life coming back. They were utterly shocked. They did the work 2 Augusts ago. So this year, I think it'll be 2 or 3 years. And within a few weeks, the land started to look different. Within a few months, it was like nothing had ever happened. And he was sitting in his office and he jokingly said that he should sue us because he's no longer getting any work done because he's looking out. And what I would say is that the honey
Oh God.
buzzard, when we gave them the initial concept, the client started crying, he and his wife. And we thought, okay, have we messed up here somehow? They were crying because honey buzzards live in Essex. We didn't know that. And there was a honey buzzard couple that would always were in the tree opposite their kitchen window. And this was their since the reason they first came to the land. So that's what's happening. If you open up to harmony and beauty, it doesn't mean we are geniuses in the normal flat meaning of that. The information is there, and if you open to receive it. So the honey buzzer was like a password that opened the energies and doors for us to create and inspired us to do what we did. They had the confidence and the trust to do it. And they say that there's wildlife appearing now that the locals haven't seen for generations.
And he's
And
gone
as you
into early
said,
retirement.
yeah. So forced retirement because he now just has his ornographic glasses. But it's remarkable. So this is what you said in the beginning. Like if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
So and that's what beauty does. So sure, we can package it saying this is a Victor Schauberger vortex. This is the geometry of the this. And that's just a tool of language that we
Yeah.
use to describe and define beauty in its various forms. Because if there's someone going to build it and they want to make a building or a shape or a pond or whatever, they need geometry to work with. Now, in the few cases that somebody was intuitively just doing an organic structure or a enclosure and not using the rigid shareable language of mathematics and geometry, then when we look at these structures and think, wow, this person was connected because they don't know what they're doing. But if we reverse engineer the floor plan of what they did, it's perfect, you know?
It is
So we have
something
it as a
remarkable.
natural coding,
Yeah.
but it's not taught in architecture schools. It's not, it's, with 7 years of training, all the rest of it. The Renaissance was mentioned only within one small little context in the same way that doctors spend one afternoon learning about the health implications of vaccines, in a 5 or 7 year. So it's ridiculous that harmony and geometry and an understanding of the tools of consciousness in a physical spatial form are not covered in our schools. No surprises there, you know.
Well, they're taught
So
taught to do it a certain way and not taught to think outside the square.
yeah, that's it.
Like,
Yeah,
Yeah, I always thought
literally
it
and
was
metaphorically.
fascinating that you know, we went from a circle to a semicircle to a equilateral triangle, even in the basics of learning, like no vesica Pisces there. Even though I realized that, technically it's a sphere with, stretched out by its points, or it is the overlapping point. It's still, it's, it's still, um,
Well,
it's still an
I think I
equally
know what you're
sided
saying.
shape in a two dimension. Mm.
Yeah, and the two dimension evokes the third evokes the fourth, and so
Yes.
on. So
Yeah.
there's but because we and our children are not learning the divine dance of masculine and feminine, they're
Mm.
not learning about energy and focus. That geometry fulfills that. In many of the seminars and things that we do, you get the point, the singularity, the unity, and so on. And that the feminine energy explodes and expresses. The masculine says, okay, that's enough, do it again. And then you got the Vesica Pisces, and then you draw the triangle, you look at them. So the masculine is seeking to find unity and order and meaning and structure within the feminine exploration and dance. This is not man woman, as you know. This is those energies
Shiva
dancing in all of
Shakti.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and geometry should do. Yes, yet when our children don't know this, and when you get the little geometry set in school and you freak out because they're A plus B times C times X, it's crazy. They're not showing us how to draw because that would seem frivolous and stupid to them because the last thing they want is for us to recognize and feel. Because if you
Mm.
take anyone and you draw Vesica Pisces, you draw the connection between the two centers of the circles, the other, you realize you just created the square root of three, you make an equilateral triangle, you find the center of that triangle, you place your hand above the piece of paper, and you will feel,
The
you'll
energy.
feel of the point of that 3D tetrahedron. And then you can expand out because that's a plasma field that you created with intention and application and so on and so forth. That's a science, and I don't mean like science with the white coats. It's a science and an art.
A
And Leo,
metaphysical
and
science.
exactly. And Leonardo da Vinci is just a name that we created to pile in all this natural genius and give it to one guy because that's what the narrative does.
It
It
does.
elevates some. It elevates, Elon Musk, the genius. And so it's.
Well, I might have to cut that bit out.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, guys.
We do have a general audience here.
Oh my God, sorry about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That that's super. That colorful metaphor. Okay, the point is that society elevates individuals specifically and targetedly to be considered geniuses, genii. But this Leonardo da Vinci did apparently say the following: in order to be a full human, let's say, you need to do four things. Develop your senses. He also described it as learn how to see. Now, that means, of course, to embed and embrace the full range of skills that our body has in terms of perceptual ability. Tens of trillions of cells, hundreds of thousands of receptors, the whole nervous system responds to the entire universe within us, and so-called without, but contained
As
within.
above, so below,
So
that is
yeah,
within, so without.
learn how to see. He also said, know that everything is connected, not
Mm.
just intellectually, but fully, and embrace it as a reality. And he said, study the art of science, the ability to observe dispassionately and enthusiastically, but without presuppositions or stories. And then to devise an experiment, be courageous enough to adjust your belief according to the evidence and so on. It's an art. Study the art of science. And also, he said, study the science of art. In other words, how does beauty come into the world? Now, what an amazing thing. Imagine if our school system did that. Develop
Yeah.
all your senses. And like Dan Winter speaks about a school in South France where all the kids are learning blindfold. They're playing they're playing sports, they're cycling, they're interacting, they're reading books completely blindfold. Because when you close your eyes, you can imagine seeing the sun with your eyes closed. Not everyone can. I don't mean because some people are special and some aren't. This is about the different brain waves, the alpha and the beta and so on. Many people who would be, let's say, have a strong addiction like alcoholism, when they close their eyes, they can't visualize light inside their own cortex awareness. But if you can imagine light, seeing the sun, and the children that are learning to read without being able to see, they are basically tuning that plasma interface in their inner picture. They see light and dark, but it's so developed that you can contrast it into being the equivalent of reading ink on a piece of paper. So the
It's
light and
very,
dark actually.
which is actually very similar to the experiments they did with, gifted children. I mean, I remember
Hmm.
these from when I was a couple of years old, where they take you, and study you for in universities and give you a set of cards and things and ask you what is on this card. Is it the
Yeah, yeah.
sun, the triangle, the this thing, the that thing?
Yeah, these are the
It's
so-called
the
Zener
same, but
cards.
with your
Yes.
eyes open, you can't see. In this case, your eyes are closed and you're asking to be,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah,
Mm.
exactly. So who knows where those testings were leading, the MK Ultra, etc., etc. But in this context, to us, that's what we want to do. We want to continue to develop our senses, to learning how to see. And
Mm.
part of that is the truth compass. Part of that is the connection with the what's really there. We want to study the art of science. We want to study the science of art, and we want to fully not just know intellectually, to fully embrace the idea that everything is connected, and not in some sort of a party statement in a new age spirituality. We're all one. If you're not actually resonating with that truth, they're just flat words. You know.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and this notion that we're here to learn, we're here to evolve our soul, that's part of this Yeah, you're eager to say something there, Freya.
I
Yeah, that's
yeah, because it's true. I was just having like a little flashback then. You triggered a flashback from, having done two epic tours through Europe and into all of the cathedrals and star forts and this thing and whatever I could get into, I was in. Crop
yeah, yeah,
circles, you name it, right?
yeah, yeah.
Boy, what a change, because you were talking about cymatics before and how when we change our frequency or the frequency shifts, everything goes into collapse, chaos for a moment, then it rebirths a new geometry, more complex than the one before. How did you guys go after jumping into as many stargates as you possibly could? How'd you come out the other side?
Well, look, we're okay. This is not in any way, shape, or form positioning ourselves relative to anyone else, but
Mm,
our whole existence is, to the best of our ability and organizational capacity, is orientated on the creation of beauty as much as is possible.
mm-hmm,
So this was about remembering as opposed
mm.
to wow, we're fully capable of wow. It's not as if we're stoic or somehow repressed in our ability to express it, far from it. But it was like, of course, my God. And then there was a recognition, how could you forget this? And of
Yeah,
course, it was a desire then to share that to the best of our ability. We do so. Now, we're a little bit off grid, metaphorically and literally, because, we're not putting any energy into a website. We're not on Instagram. We're not on Twitter. The YouTube exists just as a few videos that we don't update. But so
sounds
it's
like
like a,
me.
yeah, it's a bit of a reverse psychology there, because those that are seeking to express something find a way to us, because
Yeah,
if they so that's how we operate in that regard. So to answer your question, it was more like, okay, personally there was a feeling that you could describe as a righteous anger, and but that's not something to dwell on, nor to be limited or incapacitated by. But the righteous anger became like a recognition of what has been lost
and the
and
boundary
why.
that was crossed, the
Yeah,
huge boundary cross. Yeah.
the levels of manipulation at every
Mm,
level, astral, psychological, spiritual, you name it,
yeah.
the full recognition of that. And we could certainly package it or corral it into a perception of all of these beautiful buildings that were destroyed deliberately and consciously. That is such a crime against beauty. It's a crime against truth.
And
So
Gaia.
as holistic architects and designers, that really was a hard pill to swallow. Not that we take pills, but you know what I mean, using the metaphor. Um, in this context, but you got to go through that. You don't have to go through it, but for us, it was a
You do.
process of
You
letting it
do.
go. If we were just going to say no, this is all perfect, this is the evolution of consciousness, no, this is a manipulation of consciousness. It's a disconnected vibrational imposition, and what was lost is still felt as a loss. So rather than dwell on that and point fingers unnecessarily, when I say unnecessarily, not because it's not necessary to expose the truth, but we decided, or rather, we resonated with the pathway that was only about, let's be vehicles for truth, let's be expressors of beauty, let's do all we can to resonate with that which was, in the possibility that that energy might fuel the next iteration of that truth, as opposed to spending time
It's
looking at conspiracies and all the rest of it. So part of the thing when we talk about Tartaria as a word, we try not to use that word, to be honest, guys,
it's a
because
vast generalization.
it is,
Yeah.
and it's part of it is a little bit deliberate in our sense. Because the moment you call anything, oh, that's another Tartarian structure, you are compressing
Yeah.
what was an extremely rich timeline operating on multiple levels of consciousness into a historic narrative that there was. That means we're not aligning with truth. You're basically a cognitive bias. You're basically taking every building. It's a laziness, actually, because you're saying, oh, there's another Tartarian structure there. The moment you call it that, you are linking to a collective belief. It's a bit like saying the people with religions, the moment something shitty happens, oh, God moves in mysterious ways.
But I
Rather
think
than
what you're
looking at it as
saying is right that because we pigeonholing anything a person or
yeah,
anything is not helpful, is a judgment. Um, the concept of Tartaria, it was born from where it was born, but we have come through a major evolution in
yeah,
that. And the people who've been on that journey for the last 20 years, or even if it's been majorly since the last sort of 7, when it
yeah,
really took off,
yes, yeah, yeah,
it's been a consciousness evolution. And so
yeah.
that's why I say
Nicely put.
use the term loosely, because
Yeah,
as you said, that there's different iterations. The Stargate, beautiful Stargates, the Babylonian gardens, we're talking about an iteration, the cathedrals and so on, another iteration. And within that, there will be genres uh,
yeah. Nicely
again,
put.
So yes. So I really love what you're saying about that. I think that will help people to open into a greater inner standing and a multidimensional relationship with the folds of dimensions and time that have come.
Nicely put, Frey. Yes, we're here to remember our primal coding to the best of our
Mm.
ability and apply it as to the best of our ability, individually and collectively. And of course, we don't wish to have a story imposed upon us, nor do we wish to be dictated by such limits. And that's what we offer to the best of extent, our capacity to clients. Even the word client is such a ridiculous word, isn't it? The
To
word
to your
business.
co-creative partners, partners in creation.
Absolutely. The
Mm.
word business is come from an English word business, which means anxiety or stress.
Yeah, it was
Go figure.
interesting too. My dad was an accountant, and he always said clients. And when I went into the healing arts, and everyone said clients, and then they were like, do everything in closed rooms and separate everything. But the guidance for me was they're not clients, they're people. They're another person who requires, you to hold space for them to remember more of the truth of who they are. And
Yeah.
it's going to be done in more of an open forum than a closed forum, which was the
Yes.
exact opposite of everything I'd been taught. And you
Yeah.
experienced that because we were there together, at Earth Heart and doing
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
of the
Yeah. That's right.
amazing work there. Yeah.
Just before Zana and I were in Bali in 2019, and whilst there, uh, she had a total clarity one morning that we're heading into Endgame. But it
Mm.
wasn't apocalyptic or predictively nervous. It was basically recognizing that something shifted. And of course, a few months later, we had the COVIDiocy kicking off and so on and so forth. And in this regard, in the interim time, she felt inspired and compelled to generate the manual for the new humanity because that which was and that which can be was coming into her. And so she created over 40 short videos, each one covering a different topic of the new humanity. Each video structure was basically looking at a subject as it is, looking at what the new humanity would represent in this subject expression, and the transitionary period. What would be necessary or most optimal to get from here to here, cymatically. And in the last year and a bit, Mentorus, which is a name I coined and authored for this one-to-one process with men. It's not sacred men's business, because I wouldn't use the word business in this context. It's a process of an adventure into truth, not Michael's truth, but an adventure into truth. And actually, the very first man that connected and started it, his name was Anthony, and he lives in Melbourne. Would you believe that? And he's an architect who reached out to me, and I never knew him before. He just reached out. He was a musician first, and then an architect, and he was in his late 40s, thinking, what the hell's going on? And he contacted me, and after that initial call, there was a complete download of what I needed to create. And this is 13 different modules. It's one-to-one with each man. It's not advertised anywhere, it's word of mouth. And the idea was to have like a special force unit of conscious men uh, with some design or creative background. They don't need a
Mm.
qualification as an architect. Anyone that's consciously aware. They must not have succumbed to the psyop of COVID, and they must be open to their own truth, to the truth coming through them. And each man, I go through a process of this, and that's something we can talk about again. But the idea was to create an elite team that would be part of the transitionary process. So these men are now in 8 different countries at the moment, and they're all connected with each other, and they're already beginning to help each other.
Beautiful.
And the
Love
idea
it.
is that, yeah, so that's something else we can talk about because those 13 modules, each one is a universe in itself. For example, module three is
Yes.
the history of architecture as a tool of consciousness,
Mhm.
not the history of
It's
architecture.
it's
Stop.
it's
Yeah.
It's a,
it's
I,
so ancient mystery school. I love it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Look,
And it's
I
a,
think we need to absolutely cover this in a bit more detail than just a quick
yeah,
trip through. We have to wrap it up.
I'm sure it's, guys, you're very patient.
Well,
Oh,
I'd
no,
allowed a bit
I
of
could
time,
talk
but
to you for hours.
yeah, it can just go on for hours. Uh, However, thank you very much, Michael, for sharing your stories and sort of bringing an even a different aspect to enlightenment for a whole lot of our readers into how to think about things differently. And I'm sure when Freya writes this up very quickly, it's going to make
No pressure.
yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, yeah,
It's going to make a difference ultimately to people and how they view what you talked about, i.e., main thing being create beauty. You know,
absolutely.
everything else
Create
can
and
be
maintain.
compromised,
Yes,
but
yeah,
create beauty, and
yeah.
that's
It's
what
the
we're all
key.
about with Supernal. So, on that note,
And Anthony, may I ask Anthony, will this video be available for people or is it
yes, yeah,
just okay,
uh,
perfect.
which is at the moment supernalmagazineaustralia.com.au, and
Uh-huh.
so there, that's where we're going to direct people to.
Soon to
Wonderful.
change just to supernal.
Ah, that's a great word actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
it
so
was given to me from on high. So yeah, just
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and we're
yeah.
trying to create beauty,
Yeah.
in thoughts
so
and so.
can I ask one quick question? So Michael, can you please let everyone know how it is that they can get in touch with you?
Probably best by email, and that's the email I gave you, the Zemark
Yeah.
at zem.design. Zem is actually a Slovak word meaning earth, and it's also
Beautiful.
ZEM, which is Zana and Michael.
No,
So
look,
it's in there, zem.design. So Zemark, there's a story behind that name as well.
yeah.
I
So
can't wait to
thank you
talk to
guys.
Zana next time as well. We're looking very
I'm
much
sure she did.
forward.
Yes,
Be
absolutely.
wonderful.
All right. Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
Guys, thank you very much. Have a good evening, and we let the day unfold.
Yes, I've got a lovely
Go
lady
well.
rocking up for a session in 20 minutes. So
Go for it.
Woohoo!
got to do
All
this.
right.
However, so to wrap it up, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Freya. To everybody out there, www.supernalmagazineaustralia.com.au, and you can subscribe. It's free to get the current issue to be seen, and you can pay a small fee that helps us keep the magazine alive, and subscribe to that, and you'll get access to all our back issues, of which Michael was featured in our May 2021 issue, which was issue 27. So it's been a while since we've had you
Can't
back.
believe it's been this long.
Yeah.
What?
So we're going to get to another chat, Michael, about the whole men's business thing, or no, sorry,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Men's
yeah.
business.
creative
Get rid
inner
of the word
genius
business.
journey.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No stress.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So thank you very much and have a supernal month.
Ah, you too. Thank you, guys.